thanks for coming out tonight to see the show and to hear the talk. And please welcome Bonnie Collura.
Thanks so much, John, and thank you all for taking the time to be here. I'm really honored to have had the invitation to show work at Hallwalls, so I really appreciate that, John. And it's also been kind of a pleasure for me to kind of install last week. And when John sort of invited me to show work, I was really honored, but I also wanted to try to make some new work. As it seemed when we did our Zoom visit, it seemed like it was quite a long time ago. But I'm sure, as many of you know, when you make a plan, sometimes things unravel. So I did wound up making some new work with the assistance of a Foundation for Contemporary Art emergency grant. But it was really hard because there was just a lot of different things with school. So I came in pretty hot, and not in a good way. I came in like everything was just finished and a little disorganized. So I really appreciate John's patience with. He seemed that must have had a lot of trust in that things would come together. I also wanted to thank Ed Cardoni, who gave a lot of insight and feedback in the exhibition. And a lot of humor and information as well. And Dakota Chung, Rebecca Wing, Bill Sack, and Biff Henrik for their skilled help installing and documenting show. My husband, Matt Olson, fabricated a lot of the bases, and also kind of had a lot of patience for many, many less sleepful nights while making some of the new work. So I'm going to kind of go through a lot of images, kind of showing sort of how, I guess, the work that you'll see upstairs sort of has culminated. There's a couple of threads that run through the images, different bodies of work, some that link to a larger project called the Prince Project, and some that deviate from it. Two strands that kind of run through many of the bodies of work are an interest in work that is both accessible, where the material is accessible. The material might speak to material that we all have, or that many people have access to, and also an interest in technical discovery in materiality. When I was young, and I went to undergrad school at VCU, at Virginia Commonwealth University, and we took a trip to the Hirshhorn. And kind of, you could just imagine, like, this was such a big deal. I was a young artist, or I was a young student, and we saw all of this art, and I saw this piece on the left by Mike Kelly, Eviscerated Corpse, and it made a huge impact on me, because until this time, I didn't really see art in a museum that looked like that. Everything that I saw in a museum was, bronze or steel or metal, was material that had a lot of mystique to it, maybe how it came to be in the space. And this was something that was super related to me, because I could imagine where that was sourced. And so there was something about the plurality of the material of that Mike Kelly work that made a really big impact. And all of a sudden I felt like, that could be an artwork just like the Louise Bourgeois, who's kind of a hero for me as well. As I go through many different images, I've come to I hope that I've come to sort of knit two different ways of working. One that's a very kind of unique way of graft casting through silicone or flexible molding. So it's really technical. It's kind of really noodly, kind of a little, like if you're a mold maker, then you'll really dork out on some of the different techniques that one could do with casting. But it's kind of specialized. And then a window into repurposed fabric sort of has allowed me to speak about the body in a very different way. Allows me to think about referencing multiple bodies and also lives that have lived through those bodies. So for me, when I use fabric, it's not necessarily in the spirit of Mike Kelly, but it reminds me of that moment when I was a young artist and I saw this material that was for everybody or for many bodies, and versus the very specialized artist skill. This is another image that's always influenced me. It's G. Lorenzo Bernini's The Blessed Saint Ludovica. And it's a little hard to tell in this image right now, but there are some faint sort of lines here. And when I researched this sculpture, which is Ludovica at the moment when she's leaving her corporal body and entering the spiritual realm, I was really interested in the exaggeration of the folds right at the midpoint. They're really orgiastic. They're like completely seem non-proportional to maybe what the fabric really might yield on a body. But I learned that the rug has an understructure. And the red marble is cut in thin layers, almost like veneer, and then tacked on. And I thought that was really interesting, and that in an image, I might have assumed that this was sort of carved solid, but using sort of the material to get an effect was something I was really interested in this image. And so the effect of material and how it might clad, how it might mash, how it might smack against something, what are the inherent assets of material? How could you create a visual trick with it? Or how can it be exposed and how can it be concealed? Are also big threads in this, all of these images, but also in my development as an older artist. When I was younger, all the works were made with all different kinds of materials. But I felt that it looked very unfinished, perhaps amateurish, not professional. And I would cover everything with a fiberglass cloth and a different kind of skim coat and sanded. So it looked very like Jeff Koons, like very hyper smooth, very commercial. And there's something about that also had a really interesting optical effect, because you could go from one shape to another and not quite know what the total shape might be, what the gestalt might be, and then you start to pick out things. So I've always been really terrible at painting things, painting sculpture. And when I was younger, most of the work that I made, I would paint it in one color. And I gravitated to that because it reminded me of when I would see like an anthill or like a cluster of ants on the sidewalk from far away. You're not quite sure what the dark mass is, right? And as you get closer, it's getting a little hazier, not because your vision is poorer, because these are the individual bodies that are squirming and moving. And then of course you realize that these are ant bodies. So having one color can start to generalize the form, and I think allow the different shapes to morph in and out of one another. And I was really into that. I got into it by default, just through an act of trying to make the disparate materials look more seamless. But I got very interested in how they began to shift with the eye. So this is a really early work that I did called Virgin and Child. It really influences some of the work upstairs, two of the new pieces for the 7 series. And I was mining from a perceptual drawing called The Old Crone and Young Maiden, where I have somewhere around here, I have an image of this. I'll have to go through a lot of them, I'm afraid. This is the Young Maiden and Old Crone perceptual drawing, where it's basically the same lines, but some people might see the Young Maiden with the long neck, and some might see the Old Crone with the long nose. And when I've talked about this with my mother, she always sees the Young Maiden, I see the Old Crone, and I was really interested in how the same lines could be perceived quite differently by two different people. And so that was very influential for the that early piece, Virgin and Child, where I tried to push the different features in and out of itself. So the cheeks underneath the eye for this character become the swollen eyelids for the mouse that's underneath. The kind of in and out optical kind of thing that's happening with this is very frontal. And as I've tried to make more work throughout the years, I've tried to push that around the 360 degrees. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This is another early piece that's influenced latter work. It's called Chain Reaction. It was commissioned for Nordhorn, Germany. I visited the site. I was interested in the windmill. In mythology and folklore, windmill can refer to imagined wronged or evil. And I thought that was really strange. I was also interested in the mechanism of the stone and how it pulverized feed to go into the ground and come back up. So I wanted to make an undulation. This is on a bike path that tourists can ride on and see different art from different people. And it was going to be permanent. And I was pretty young when I was doing this, and it was the first work that I was going to have permanent, and I was a little uncomfortable with what that meant. So I cast these different figures, and my backside fits into this form up there, and my hand is able to connect hands with the different characters. I wanted it to refer to my body as if I was melting into the ground. So we matched my skin tone with the prosthetic limb company. We painted it. So having this mutability or this changeable body has been something I've been interested in, mostly because I'm using the figure less as a portrait, but more as I look at the body as a construct of influences, stereotypes, presumptions, objections that I feel get given to us mostly through images, right? Where an image comes from, or how an image is used, or how a character is either vilified or honored through a story is something I'm really interested in. And I think the act of pollinating images with the resemblance of people or characters is very unstable. Yet making a figurative sculpture often in the past was done to try to teach something or connote a particular kind of viewpoint. So I'm kind of working in two different strands. One kind of looking at abstract form and how it can push and pull, and also looking at particular kinds of icons or references and how I can get them to both seem like they're dissolving and kind of falling under the weight or the burden of their reproduction, image reproduction, as well as trying to lift up and turn into something new. This is a piece I did called Snowman. This is out in Germany on the site. Those pieces I showed you, I would make them out of foam, skim coat them with water putty, and then because they were going outdoors, I was represented by a gallery, and we got them fabricated by a fabrication company. And it was quite expensive, and I had no idea about price points or anything like that. And it was becoming a new piece of information for my studio, but a burden. It was starting to limit the kinds of shapes I could do because of the cost of molding. If you know anyone who makes a mold, mold making takes a lot of time. The more simple the shape, the simpler the mold, less time it takes to make it. While I didn't know what my future work would be back then, I knew that a lot of my interests would rest in the complexity of form. I really liked the push and pull of the figure. I was interested in making the figure almost as if it was irrecognizable at one angle and then came into perception at another. And that would probably be more elaborate than minimalist. So I started to learn how to mold and cast on my own. And that was a really expensive endeavor. Some might think it was really a foolish endeavor, but it allowed me to start thinking about casting elements the way I was collaging with paper. Because I wasn't casting solid. It was too expensive, it was too heavy, broke my back when I was 18. Carrying heavy things doesn't really work well for me. So all of a sudden I had this new flexible kind of piece of paper that I could cast thin shells in, cut it, and then drill holes in it and kind of connect it to another piece, another piece, another piece, another piece. Even though I wasn't a very good flexible mold maker, the way of casting hollow shells really aligned with a lot of the collaging had been done, and it was really liberating. So this was the first series of portraits I did through casting. I made 6 different molds, but I made 9 heads from those molds. When I was making this is when 9/11 happened, and Harry Philbrick from the Aldrich Museum at the time was a curator at the Aldrich Museum. And Skywalker is a mythological word that means guardian of the sky. And I wanted to create some portraits that would not fly away. I lived in Brooklyn, and sort of the smell of the towers was part of my daily kind of, I would smell the ash in my studio. So when we first installed this, each head got a shadow. I point the light on the head, got the shadow, cut it out, and we cut it out in black plexiglass and installed it outdoors so that you'd see the clouds move past it. For each head, I cut a 30-foot felt vine, and I cast rocks, and I dug 3 foot into the ground at the Aldrich, tied the rock, and each head has like a little kind of balloon knot, so theoretically, like, these heads wouldn't fly away. These vines are in Hallwalls on the other side. So it's been many years later, but they've kind of resurfaced. In the early days, that piece on the left, Rebel Angel, is made just like the piece on the right. So, except I would cover everything so it looked like a very seamless gloss. So in the end, oftentimes when people are making art or sculptors are making work, it's kind of like the last 15% of work that you're doing at the tail end is the first 15% that the viewer sees, right? But I'm seeing the right-hand side for the most of the entirety of the process. This smashing, this difference, and I started to slowly realize that the vulnerability of all these differences, and it's not probably unlikely that became more interesting to me as my own body was getting older, became a lot more interesting to me to see how I could reveal the understructure. But on the left is sort of what is very skim coat. On the right is what I would see in the studio. This is attachment barrel of monkey arm. It's the first limb for a much larger character I wanted to create called the Prince figure. And I was working a lot of jobs, trying to pay down my school debt and rent. And it seemed like the more jobs I had, the less time I had for the studio. And the studio was becoming like a surrogate being for me. And I was really thinking about what a soulmate kind of meant. And I thought about it in terms of sincerity as well as also kind of novels and tropes. And I was thinking a lot of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein text. So I cast my own arm at the time, and I had it cast in fiberglass resin, and we did 3 different colors for 3 color codes that started the foundation of a system called the Prince Project. This one is in Guardian Blue. There's another one in Abductor Red, a third one in Martyr Yellow, and a 4th one in Creator Green. That limb started an idea that I wanted to make. I was thinking of kind of the male heroic sculptor, and I wanted to kind of challenge that. Both, I was trying to make fun of it as well as sort of take it on, I guess. On the left is a painting of Pygmalion, was a famed sculptor in mythology, kissing Galatea. And so as the legend goes, he sculpts there's no real woman that can match what he feels like is his standard of beauty. So he decides that since there's no real human that will do that, he's going to sculpt that. He's going to sculpt this ideal figure, and he prays. He talks to the goddess Aphrodite to bring her to life. And this is the painting when he kisses the statue and it responds back to her. And so I was thinking about sort of this idea of sort of sculpting sort of an ideal, sort of a soulmate. And I thought that it was, I felt like as a female sculptor, I now had, through mold making, I now had the skill, I could do it, right? I thought that was something really empowering that I could take on, kind of making this amalgam of these 4 icons. But I also thought it was kind of a cop-out, because if your soulmate, right, is a statue and you have an argument, right, it's not gonna argue about it. You're gonna win every argument. All these things occur. So I thought of what an ideal sort of, icon would be. And I thought of these 4 different characters, and they were Jesus, Saint Sebastian, C-3PO, and Abraham Lincoln. And what unified those 3 characters was they were left with a hole in their body. And that hole became a big part of their legend in print or in film. And so I associated the hole, the way the hole in a needle is, and that it's a throughway, but also that a hole sometimes can be synonymous with the female form. So that was sort of the start of how I was going to create this amalgam. And I came up with this whole big system for this Prince project. And I had no money, and I was like kind of working with slips of paper, and I created sort of all these different phases of the system for a project that I kind of thought would happen like in 2 years, but wound up becoming sort of kind of a lifetime project that ebbs and flows through different works. And so some of the things that you'll see in this presentation relate to the Prince project, and then some things don't, and they come in and come out. Some things are related to it upstairs, and some things are not. At the time, I wanted to figure out how I could make this ideal sort of construction to scale, so I made it in paper. This collaging is very similar to how I will stitch casts together in a sculpture. The taping is very analogous to how I'll cut holes into shells of casts. I made a paper cast. That's all I could afford. I made a clay model. I was fortunate enough to get a Guggenheim grant, which gave me funds that I had not yet had at that point on my own, and I started making it to scale 3 dimensions. This was in my studio in Brooklyn, and this is a cast of Abraham Lincoln's, and I was trying to make the materiality begin to reveal itself instead of always covering it with a mask and making it look glossed. In the Prince project, there's several different sections. It's basically kind of aligning itself to the monster in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where it's rooting a character that is inherently unstable because of the way that its character makeup has been built through fiction or through the victor of who's writing the text. And so I'm trying to get different themes of the project so that different characters reveal itself to the main character to kind of give it guidance on what is the end of the project, which is white light, which is an armor that I wear that projects multiple drawings to hopefully show a sense of healing and peace and love at the end of its whole journey. But this is the start of the 7 series, 2 of the 7 characters upstairs, and they do something similar to what the earlier Virgin and Child sculpture did, where that was trying to kind of optically flip between 2 different faces, and each 7 is a mash between a dwarf from Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, a vice and a virtue. So Sneezy, envy, kindness; Doc, bashful lust, chastity; are two of the sevens. The sevens are in balloons, in drawings, and in sculptures. These are some drawings and balloons I did at McDowell Colony. So the balloon skin became really influential in how I started to see casts as being sort of unstable or connected skins of bodies. On the left-hand side is a sculpture called Mary. On the right-hand side is a cast of my own face. It's called Visible Woman. And this is kind of at a point where I was really interested in merging sort of the cloak and then also the reveal of the real material that happens in the studio. Going back to that earlier image, when is it okay to show sort of exactly what happens and how you build? Or when do you need to kind of make things look more cohesive and seamless? And is that because of the look or is that because of the structure? I was given the opportunity to show some work in the Ebbenstein Fortress in Germany. And usually if I get an opportunity, I'm trying to figure out how can I get one little nugget of this larger cosmology made. And in this case, it was an opportunity I could start to make the very first 7 sculpture, which are fairly large, so they take a lot of time, they take a lot of energy, and often a lot of funding. So that was the head for Dot Pride Humility in clay there. And this is the Ebbenstein Fortress in Germany. And this is how I built these sculptures. So this head is hydrostone, the cast is microcrystalline wax, this is a welded structure, and then I'm like obsessively going over it with ribbons. I'm not quite sure why I did that, because I didn't keep that in the cast, but it was sort of something I wanted to do as I was working. This is polystyrene foam. It's not stable, it's not archival. This will all fall apart. But this is how I get the forms to move in and out. I'm trying to really use whatever material will yield whatever kind of undulation I can get fairly easily. So when I'm casting with wax, if I need it to buckle, I'll dunk it in hot water and then bend it around a form and then try to freeze it prior to molding. This was post molding and casting it. So all that tape is really similar to how I'm taping my drawings. It's very similar to how a lot of the smashing is happening upstairs, except that in this case, this is just a means to an end. I'm just trying to keep it all together before I'm like solidifying and painting it. At this time now, my new work is trying to figure out how can I reveal, trying to hold it all together without it actually breaking. And this is the piece. It was to be seen against Hans Arp on the Ebbenstein Fortress. So this is like a lot of people ask me like, why do you work in plastic? And it's a really good question. So as sort of it's kind of like I feel like as a female sculptor, I want to have the option to take up space. I feel like in the canon, there's not that many female identified artists that are taking up space. So if I have a certain amount of money, I could make something out of bronze and it might be really good, but it probably would be very small. And so since I knew I was going to be flanked around sort of an artist that some people feel is sort of the founder of biomorphic art, I wanted to have a presence. And so that's why sort of I chose my casting material. So this was cast in a really thin layer of plastic and backed with foam. And it stood on the Ebbenstein Fortress for about 6 months. And then it came back to the US, and then many years later, it went outside the Palmer Museum, which is a museum right where next door where I work at Penn State. So a lot of the times when I'm making my work, I'm really trying to kind of test the limits of what the material could do. And it's not really because I'm trying to it's not so much like I'm trying to wrestle with the material. It's more like I'm I'm trying to conjure up like a spirit, a kind of quality, a kind of presence through a figure that has a certain kind of power. And I don't really know what that power is until I start assembling it. And as I'm walking around it, the way that my body walks or moves around a sculpture is a really important material, and how I begin to understand what it needs to be, like what it needs to command, how it needs to feel, how it needs to take up space. A lot of times I'll refer to something as the bump back effect. That's when a sculpture is really working for me, when I'm moving around it and the angles are not predictable and I'm literally bumping back into something, right? I'm forgetting that what the space is around me and I'm really becoming at one with the sculpture. And that doesn't mean that they always have to be big, but there is usually a dance between my body and the construct of the body that I'm trying to create when I'm making the work. And as I started to make more, I'm starting to reveal more of the mash. This is a piece called Death of the Virgin, where I'm flipping the gender association of the painting, Death of the Virgin, from female to male in that. And I'm letting the foam, I'm letting the wax, I'm letting all that be revealed, but I'm trying to really kind of architect it so I'm almost trying to use the plaster. I'm making kind of bridges, cardboard bridges, so that when I'm pouring it, it moves in a particular way. I'm trying to find a balance between sort of a finished assembly of line, as well as something that's really truly like kind of spontaneously created. And this is one version of a Prince character I did. As I was working with these thin shells, I was thinking a lot about sewing. I had a student that wanted to take an independent study with me for 7 credits in the summer, which could be a nightmare or an opportunity depending on the student and also where you are in your studio process. And Liz Fontaine was such a great sewer. And I didn't know much about sewing. So I said, yeah, you can work for me, but I want you to teach me how to sew. And she did. And I always wanted to make the engine for the end of the Prince project based on how my body moved. But I didn't want it to reveal my anatomy. So I always imagined that the locus for that would be a wearable that I could move and that would generate the form, the atmosphere that other people could walk through. So I started to generate this thing called Armor for White Light, which is upstairs. It's a 10-layer garment that is sewn and for my body, and it's built from 10 cut and sewn drawings from 10 years, from 2002 to 2012. At the time, I'm living in central Pennsylvania. For a long time, I lived in Brooklyn, where I was able to see art shows, have studio visits. I kind of felt like I was part of an ecosystem of art. And when I moved to central Pennsylvania, I felt that I was more alienated from that, but highly connected to the privilege of working with young people's creativity, right? Like as a teacher, right? It's like you are put in the midst of people's lives and they reveal things to you through art that that you never thought you would experience the day before, right? And through when a student's working on an art idea, right? It's like it could be the craziest thing. They want to be like, what do you want to make? You want to make that, right? And sometimes it's like really fun, or sometimes someone doesn't think that they have any kind of artistic talent, and you show them how to do 1 or 2 things, and you can see their empowerment grow and develop. Their whole life might be falling apart, but whatever they've just made in front of them, in front of you, and in front of them, like they know that that's real. They know that that's like assured. And so while I was feeling very alienated from a contemporary art world, I was getting like very highly connected in my identity as a community member for what other people could do with their creativity was getting very highly strengthened. So I was really kind of like at a point where I was like, I don't care about I don't want to archive all of my old work. I'm not going to be one of those artists that's going to start thinking that I need to hold on to everything for some mythic kind of retrospective. That's not going to happen, for me. So I decided, you know what? I don't like these drawings. They're okay, they're kind of good, but they're not great. So let's cut them up and let's make something new. And I did that with everything. I did that with my drawings, I did it with my old work, and I just started saying forget it. Forget whatever that ecosystem was. I'm here now, and how can I make my work better now? So I cut and sewed all of these drawings for 10 years. That's our cat. Her name's Louise Bourgeois. And we found her in Minnesota on my husband's father's farm, and I have an irrational love for her. So she sometimes comes to the studio and she does quality control for me, but I cut them up in these little nuggets. And then I also started tracing my drawings on different parts of the muslin, and I would sew them, and each layer was built so that when I moved with it, I would make an ever-changing new drawing, no matter how many times I performed in it. The weight of it was a really important thing for me. I was trying to sort of summon a pathos for some people that were close to me that had passed away. So when I was moving in the armor for the first time in the video Spillover, which is upstairs, I was really thinking about the weight of the garment, but also the weight of my mourning. Two things were influencing how the garment was structured. One was the samurai armor, not so much the shape of it, but how details, and these are some parts of these are very paper thin, and they're very highly encrusted. And I was interested in how could incrustation create a certain level of intimidation in something, in a surface, as well as the Alexander McQueen, the way that it would contort to the body. This is it at the American Academy of Arts and Letters. This is me performing it at Penn State, so it can really reflect different light. I'm doing different things in the armor, and then these are stills from the video upstairs Spillover. So the ultimate goal, either when I'm dead or maybe before then, is that at the end of you'd see all these different Prince Project themes, and at the end, sort of the light effects from these, you walk through and they'd spill over you. But I really liked how when we edited my performance, it became all these different kind of bodies, plant bodies, insect bodies, all kinds of things. Imperceptible Rupture was a body of work where I was smashing the clay and using the cast, and that has a real effect on how the sevens have been generated upstairs. These are finished versions of what you just saw of the casts. But this is also a piece, More Perfect Union is where I'm really starting to implement fabric into the work for the first time. I'm seeing the casts as kind of layers or pieces of paper that I'm collaging, but also fabric. This was a couple years ago, but my studio can be a pretty creepy place. I'm kind of doing all kinds of weird grafting things between both the casts, right? This is Fortuna upstairs, and then also I'm sewing right next to it. So on the right is really just several different pieces of quilted fabric that I'm pinning together, and in my mind it's almost synonymous to the way that I'm graft casting for the hard shell there. On Target, it was done in 2019. It was the first quilt that I had made using all repurposed cloth that comes into play upstairs, because on the back side, this was shown mostly frontal, like you see on the left. It was done in a show where I was really pushing fabric through hard shell casts for the first time, I would guess, at Anacostera. But on the back, I didn't know how to actually finish a quilt. And so I brought it to a quilt shop in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, and we randomly chose these colors at the time. And you can walk underneath it and kind of see these colors and see through the quilt. But later, I decided this is a couple of streets, this couple blocks down. This is in the Best Western. I was coming in so hot, like to this show upstairs, but I really wanted in today's climate, with what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, I wanted to reverse that quilt and sew up the seams so that the yellow and the blue were exposed. So that was, I actually had a sewing station in the hotel. I would put the sewing machine on the bed to try to muffle the sound, and John was really gracious and I was coming in with this piece that was not finished, and then I finished it at the Saturday before. So that became On Target, Necessary Alterations, and finished in 2022. Upstairs is, this is the head for the silver sculpture, but this is how it's made. This is made really low tech. I'm just braiding wire. I'm covering it with quilt batting because quilting and sewing is like a natural kind of extension of my process at this point. And then I'm covering that with resin to make it hard. I'm making thin casts in and machine plastic, and before it totally kicks, I pull it out of the cast and I wrap it around that to make a very complex form, but in a very simple way. And this is this is one of the 4 characters to the Prince figure, but I'm trying to refer to a mutable, changeable body. So this is matriarch, heavy metal Jesus. And that's it. This is it installed at Pygmalion. The silk organzas pieces are the apparitions of those 4 characters. I'm built them to scale as if they were expelling sort of their patriarchy, so to speak. In the middle is a piece called Guardian Blue. It's one of the color codes to the Prince project. And Abductor Red is hanging there, Crater Green, Martyr Yellow, and Fortuna is in the middle. In the Prince project, I'm referencing in part a text called The Prince, and in that he linkens an ideal prince as a political figure, as one that could toggle both virtue and fortuna. Virtue is the circumstance of the day, and how you can twist the circumstance to your own advantage. So how this also has ties to being kind of being very manipulative, and he also linkens a good politician on how one can bypass Fortuna. And in the text, he parallels Fortuna to an uncontrollable woman. So I wanted to usurp that text, and I saw fabric, the hard shell is always fixed in the work, but in fabric, unless you're using a lot of splining or a lot of interface, fabric is very difficult to reposition the same way twice. So in that way, in all the work that's mashing both hard shell and fabric, I see the fabric as the material that's purposely interrogating the statuary figure to disrupt it. And I see the fabric as very much in the legacy of female handcraft work. Just a closer, this kind of gives you a better scale of what these silk organza apparitions are. On the left is a crate that has all of the scraps that I collected from making all of those color codes. And I call that piece Power. Because it's summoning the energy from those color codes And it's also the scraps that I encouraged others throughout that exhibition to take. I have scraps here. If you're interested in taking any kind of scraps from the color codes, you can. But that piece was actually pretty important to me, because I was thinking a lot about sort of the collective impact that happens in the classroom, and how when you're in a classroom situation and you're working with other people and they're sharing their life stories, you're sharing skills, you're working back and forth. In the best case scenario, two people are coming out of that and more enriched than they came in before. So figure out how to sort of get work to go out in a way that's different than only looking at a sculpture, a three-dimensional sculpture, was something that I was really interested in. So sort of like, I wouldn't say this is gifted, but sort of having sort of these takeaways became something I was interested in. And that's really extended far more now into projects that I'm doing with, say, the School of Engineering, or and a project called Together Tacit, where we work with blind and low vision people, so they can begin to create a sculpture in virtual reality through a glove that will give them only haptic information. And then the sighted person works with them to recreate that in real time, real space through collaboration. So while those two things seem really different, this piece, Power, and how people might take it and do whatever they want with it, became something I was really interested in exploring more. And that got turned into Open Sky. My grandparents are from Italy, and my grandmother immigrated to the United States when she was 7 years old. And she did not go back to Italy until my father and uncle could afford to bring her for my grandma and grandpa's 50th anniversary. And I got the book that she wrote about that trip. When she passed away, I was given that book. And so I read her diary, or I read every day all the different notes that she wrote for experiencing that trip. And she said, she wrote when she went into St. Peter's Square. And I don't know if it was her language or if it was from a tour director, but she said that Rome is a museum and an open sky. And I was really taken with that, because it seemed like the way I interpreted it was that it was all of a sudden, these were statues, or this was an experience that was accessible, right? It was an open sky, and I thought about how could you get this sort of over-the-top experience accessible to others, but built by others. And so I was influenced by the dome in that Bernini chapel, but also this mid-century egg basket, where the structure is mutable, it's always changeable. And so I did a call where I asked if people would like to donate fabric that would commemorate or honor a loved one. It could honor a lived loved one, someone who's living, or someone that had passed away. And so I got several fabric donations. And as I got fabric donations, sometimes they would come in anonymous, like these were worn by my aunt. Sometimes I would get sort of written text about who the person was. And so what I did is, even though this looks very different than my sculpture, my figurative sculpture, it's really done in a similar way. I'm patchworking different elements together, making a composite body from different sort of thin-walled surfaces that turns into a changeable, abstract, collective body. So it has all different kinds of shapes, and it is my way of creating work from a material that is used by all of us, or that can be relatable to all of us. When a donor gives me donated fabric, so this one, Katie Hovenkamp, gave me scarves from her mother, Elizabeth Hedberg Hovikamp, who had died a few years earlier. I make a small quilt for them as a way to thank them for that donation. So that's a different way of this back and forth that happened earlier with the power piece of those scraps. And this is a fabric that my mother gave me of her mother, which is my grandmother, of her wedding dress is in this series. So these link with Katie's mom, they link with other donors to make this network of individuals that I'm hoping will become much larger, that people could walk under the open sky that my grandmother mentioned. And in this show upstairs, it's hanging next to the silver sculpture. That idea of kind of using cloth as a vessel or a vehicle to speak of multiple bodies to give to someone else became, the next thing I did was these things called quilt thank you cards during the pandemic. As we all were in isolation, I was thinking a lot about, I was reflecting a lot of my time, my life, and I just think I have a lot to be grateful for, and I don't think anybody owes us any kindness, right? When someone's nice to me, I'm like, oh, that's so nice. Like, someone's so nice, It's like they don't have to be like that. So I was thinking of all the things that so many people have done for me that were so kind, and I wanted to say thank you. But I really liked the idea of like using cloth to do it. So I made like a 4-sided quilted entity that had a back pocket that you could push and pull and create an ever-changing quilt, right? It was another way to think about mutability, to think about a changing figure, a morphing form, but just in a different way. And I made a lot of these during the pandemic, and I still do today. And they're really small. They're really satisfying for me because I can get them done in about 4 hours. It's not like 4 months to make a figurative sculpture. And they're all made from gifted or repurposed cloth. When I give one to a person, I usually also make a quilt avatar, which is supposed to be this spirit that's a beneficial spirit that looks over them. And then I started to quilt actually large figures. So this is No Way Out But Through that I did in 2020. We're almost at the end. And then this is the newer work where, as the title says, I'm 2 months at this time. At this time I was 2 months from 50. And similar to how I did with my drawings, I was basically kind of like, I wanted to make something where all these past voices of like, no, you can't show that. That's not finished. That doesn't look good. That's not archival. That's not right. I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the whole index of all the things, of all the no's, and I'm putting them in this one sculpture. And so, but I wanted to do it as if it, actually John wrote about this in the catalog, that the figure looks almost as if it's like barely holding itself together, right? It's about to fall apart. But there's some element of it that is actually like rising up. And so that teeter has been a really big influence in the last 2 years. And so trying to create the 2 new 7 sculptures to really feel as if they're having a full emotional arc was a big emphasis with Grumpy Wrath Patience, which was just finished maybe 2 weeks ago, which is upstairs. So there's 3 different heads, there's 3 different colors. Hopefully, when you walk around it, you might have different kinds of associations. This figure does have a little guardian. It's a bird that I didn't get in the image, but it's a yellow bird. Check it out. And then this is Sneezy Envy Kindness. So this Sneezy is on this side. Kindness is here, envy is here. I was thinking of an anatomical model as well as a patchwork quilt. I'm actually literally patchworking with the paint now and mashing all the different kinds of casts. And then empire, I was thinking of, consumerism. I was thinking of America. I was thinking of Russia. I was thinking of all different kinds of empires in this, where it looks both like the creation finger in Michelangelo's painting, as well as it's the middle finger sticking straight out. And that's it. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I'm happy to answer any.
When you were going through the drawings, your old drawings that whole period of time, did you come across forms or images or gestures that can remind you that maybe later found a way to new work?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, my drawings, it's a lot, I think I'm able to sort of get a liquidity of I think in my drawings I'm able to get faces to move in and out of each other and in a more fluid and delicate way, where it's kind of like sometimes you'll see a prominent face first, and then because I'm using like watercolor, I'm airbrushing a secondary face, it emerges slower, right? And that has become, that I noticed a lot. And trying to figure out how to do that in sculptural form is something that has influenced a lot of sculpture. I can't say that I do it, but that's what I noticed. It was sort of like, because you know, when you're working in a drawing, you could like make a dominant line, and then you could have a much lighter line come out from underneath it. So it's almost like you have a lot of control on the tempo, or like the pattern in which different layers of something come forward. So I noticed that. And I always think about those when I try to make, especially the new work. That's what I've noticed the most. Yeah.
Wondering what your tie to Machiavelli is. It doesn't seem like you're so brutal. I mean, maybe in the forms, but my perspective of Machiavelli is kind of highly duplicitous and the worst of politics.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think when I reference sort of the Prince, his text, the Prince, sort of my relationship with it, or my position with it, is really coming from the character of fabric. Like I'm interested in upending the stability of a statuesque form, and sort of I'm using characters that have been created by pop culture, and that is very problematic, right? Like what they represent, or how they came to be, or how we form personas, right? And personas we all have a persona. We all can choose to define the kind of persona we give forth, but other people prescribe personas to others, right? And so for me, I'm interested in the fabric sort of disrupting that control. But I would not say I definitely, and I think I've mentioned this in in a particular article about the fabric, it's very subtle. I think that probably most people would see the fabric as maybe more decorative, or kind of like a quirky element, not so much as the thing that's refusing that piece to be seen the same way twice, because that would rely on you seeing that work upstairs somewhere else, and therefore the fabric running through it a whole different time. So I don't know if that answers it, but I see kind of the fabric as a disruptor to.
I mean, I think he's known as an artistic of the art of manipulation, right? So I think you're doing that. So.
Yeah.
Can I ask you just a little bit, could you talk a little bit about Disney? Because are these like Seven Dwarfs or I think does that figure work for you, Disney characters?
They did earlier, and I think, I think Disney, I think of Disney as a mass conglomeration, and that it's, I use oftentimes there's like a common sort of smile that I'll use in a lot of the work to sort of either overtly or subversively refer to a kind of control. Like it's, I'm not so much interested in referring to particular characters of Disney as I am in a conglomeration that creates visual representations of things that force kinds of thinking. So when I'm using, in Empire, I'm using the Disney characters to speak of America, not so much of the plasticity of cartoon characters. I see Disney as a stand-in for a consumer culture and kind of America. Well, thank you. Thanks, everyone.